So we have a brief devotional reading before we move on to the talk. The reading is from The Voice of the Silence, the third fragment, the seven portals, starting on page 54. Of teachers there are many. The master soul is one, a liar, the universal soul. Live in that master as its ray in thee. Live in thy fellows as they live in it. Before thou standest on the threshold of the path, before thou crossest the foremost gate, thou hast to merge the two into one and sacrifice the personal to self-impersonal, and thus destroy the path between the two, antaskarana. Thou hast to be prepared to answer dharma, the stern law, whose voice will ask thee at thy initial step. Hast thou complied with all the rules, O thou of lofty hopes? Hast thou attuned thy mind and heart to the great mind and heart of all mankind? For as the sacred river's roaring voice, whereby all nature's sounds are echoed back, so must the heart of him who in the stream would enter thrill in the response to every sigh and thought of all that lives and breathes. Disciples may liken to the strings of a soul-echoing vina, mankind unto its sounding board. The hand that sweeps it to the tuneful breath of the great world oversoul. The string that fails to answer neath the master's touch in dulcet harmony with all the others breaks and is cast away. So the collective minds of Lanu Shravakas, they have to be attuned to the Upadhyaya's mind, one with the oversoul, or break away. Thus do the brothers of the shadow, the murderers of the souls, the dread Dukkha clan. Hast thou attuned thy being to humanity's great pain, O candidate for light? Thou hast, thou mayst enter. And now we move on to the talk.
Welcome again, friends. Today's talk is on the Law of Correspondences, and I'll bring up some slides. Are they visible?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here we go. The Law of Correspondences. As above, so below is a Hermetic Axiom that applies at every level of thought, from the macrocosmic evolution to the human microcosm. In The Secret Doctrine, H.P. Blavatsky says that this occult law is the first key to the world problem and to the 7 keys of the universe. The universe is worked and guided from within outwards. Man, the microcosm, a miniature copy of the macrocosm, is the living witness to this universal law and the mode of its action. Analogy, HPB tells us, is the Ariadne's thread that guides us through the labyrinth of nature. Analogy and correspondence are indispensable tools in the study of theosophy. They enable us to draw meaningful comparisons and parallels, to bridge the chasm between universals and particulars, and to understand the inner essence behind outer forms. Using these keys, we can navigate from the spiritual to the cosmic or archetypal, and then from the cosmic or archetypal plane to the material planes, moving from noumena to phenomena, and then back up the chain again. This is the foundation of what theosophy calls the law of correspondence and analogy. It rests on the premise that everything in the manifested realm is a reflection of the invisible archetypal realms. The part reflects the whole, and that the same patterns echo throughout every plane of existence. And this is why we find so much resonance in the occult axioms, as above, so below, and as within, so without. Analogy and correspondence are used to draw comparisons and parallels and to express the nature of the relation between two particulars, often by identifying their shared qualities or patterns. They're also powerful tools in reasoning, especially when moving between universals and particulars, whether we're reasoning deductively or inductively. When we use analogy and correspondence, there are usually three elements involved: the subject, the object, and the attributes being compared. It's important to understand that to say A corresponds to B does not mean they're identical, but that they share a likeness in one or more attributes. In theosophical writings, this kind of comparison is often left like a little open-ended, not always spelled out. And this allows the student to discover those shared qualities for themselves. And this process becomes a deliberate exercise in the use of reason and intuition. And it invites us to not just absorb information, but to engage with it inwardly, to think, to feel, and to see. Analogy is usually a means of comparison, as was said, not of equating things. For instance, one might say a cat is analogous to a dog. Obviously, that means that they're not identical, only that they share some attributes, but it's up to each of us to explore what those shared qualities or attributes actually are. Another example of this might be a statement such as, the cycle of day and night is analogous to life and death. Here, the student is left to consider each and make specific comparisons. Both daytime and life are active periods. Both sleep and the after-death states represent a withdrawal from the body. The analogy isn't perfect in every way, but it works because of key similarities. Looking back through history, the Greek philosophers understood the power of analogy. The word itself comes from the Greek analogia, which originally referred to proportional relationships. For example, one might say A is to B as C is to D. And this is especially clear in geometry, as in like a triangle with two equal sides. But the Greeks applied it more broadly in philosophy as well. Plato expands the use of analogy beyond mathematical ratios. For him, analogy could describe a structural or functional similarity, such as when he says in the Republic, the sun is to sight what the good is to intellect. The good here meaning agathon, the highest form or idea, or the most supreme transcendent principle from which all truth, beauty, and being is derived. In other words, just as the sun makes physical sight possible, the good makes intellectual and spiritual insight possible. This analogy moves from physical proportion to abstract correspondence. Another famous example is Plato's allegory of the cave. The soul's journey from shadow to sunlight mirrors the movement from ignorance to knowledge, from illusion to truth. It's a powerful illustration of how analogy helps us understand higher realities by referencing familiar ones. Aristotle goes even further, applying analogy to compare functions, roles, and relationships in a more concrete way, such as comparing the faculties of the soul to the physical senses. In De Anima, Aristotle writes, as the hand is the tool of tools, so the mind, nous, is the form of forms. The hand is called the tool of tools because of its unique adaptability. It's universally adaptable in some ways. It can hold or manipulate any other tool. In the same way, nous, or higher mind, is the form of forms because it has the capacity to receive, grasp, or contain any idea or object of thought. So this is not just analogy as proportion, but analogy as a way to explain inner function by an outer example. In theosophy, the term analogy often refers to this kind of broader comparison, one that reveals spiritual or psychological parallels. Correspondence, on the other hand, usually points to something deeper, a more structured, often proportional relationship. For example, we might say that the notes of the musical scale correspond to the colors of the visible spectrum, or that the 7 human principles correspond to the 7 globes of a planetary chain, as in the diagram on the screen. These aren't vague similarities. They reflect a precise and detailed internal harmony, a full sevenfold parallel, where each level or part matches its counterpart in both ratio and function. Another example of this law in action is the cyclic progression of rounds and root races, which mirrors the arc of reincarnation. In each case, we see the same fundamental pattern repeating: descent into form, followed by a return to spirit. In other words, involution and evolution. It's the same rhythm echoing through the larger and the smaller scales. And this diagram comes from the Secret Doctrine and shows the involution, evolution of the rounds and the globes, but it also could be applied to the human being as the 7 principles and perfecting each one. Another such diagram could include the sevenfold constitution of man, showing Atma, Buddhi, Manas, Kama, Prana, Linga, Sharira, and physical body arranged in their respective planes. And if we were to place this next to a diagram of the 7 cosmic planes or globes, we would see a parallel, that each human principle corresponds to a plane of cosmic manifestation. So this same diagram that shows the arc of involution and evolution illustrates the descent of spirit into matter, followed by the return or evolution back towards spirit. And the turning point comes at the deepest immersion in matter, where the ascent begins. And that's where we are on the Earth in globe D. This same arc could be applied to planetary evolution, as was mentioned, or to the soul's journey through reincarnation, or even to the daily rhythm of consciousness, from waking to dreaming to deep sleep. In other words, there's many parallels we can draw, and that's why some of the diagrams in the Secret Doctrine are so helpful, because it can open up multiple meanings. And by studying such diagrams, we can train our minds to perceive deeper patterns and to recognize that these processes are not outside of us, but they're fundamentally interconnected expressions of one law, and that it plays out through every scale of being. And in this way, visual study complements intellectual understanding, and over time, it opens the door to deeper intuitive insights. Mr. Crosby wrote an article on the Law of Correspondences, and he maintained that this law is of far greater importance than most suspect. He said that we sense correspondences intuitively in nature, such as the 7 colors of the rainbow and the 7 notes of the musical scale, but we ourselves perceive only a narrow band of vibrations, as in this diagram that shows visible light being such a small part of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So above and below that range lies countless vibrations beyond our senses, either too subtle or too coarse for them to register by our senses. And in this way, we can see that we stand poised midway between two vast realms, partly asleep and partly awake to the full vibrational universe around us. But when our spiritual senses begin to unfold, we will be able to perceive, to know, and to experience more and more, not just outwardly with the physical senses, but inwardly through different phases of consciousness. In Theosophy, we say that in planetary evolution, all forms arise from homogeneous radiant matter, such as that which makes up the Milky Way. Every being is a center, a reflection of that one great center. And since all beings proceed from that same source, they are all governed by the same laws, each one manifesting certain attributes as available through karma. So this is akin to saying that there's a living correspondence between every being and the universe as a whole. And even more, a deep connection between each being and every other being. And this law of correspondence acts through a septenary structure from the finest matter down to the grossest physical substance. And here again is another diagram from the Secret Doctrine, which shows the human principles on one side and how they correspond to physical principles in nature. So every being carries within itself each stage that it has passed through. So in the human constitution, each principle resonates with a corresponding principle in the greater cosmos. So we could take, for example, the fourth principle, whether in a human, an animal, or a planet, expresses a similar function and quality. And we can draw meaningful correspondences across all levels of nature, because ultimately nothing in the universe lies outside of our inner natures. The same laws, the same patterns, and the same forces live within us, just as they operate outside of us, like in the stars or on a galactic macrocosmic level. At the heart of all these correspondences lies a tremendous, immeasurable science that extends through every state of matter and every plane of consciousness. And this is the knowledge that perfected men have, such as the adepts. But this knowledge cannot be handed to us from outside. It has to be discovered for ourselves through self-induced and self-devised efforts. The great masters of wisdom who have passed this knowledge down walked this very path, and they faced similar struggles, but it was through their own effort and realization that they awakened to truth. Evolution proceeds by the extension of consciousness within the form. So one of our primary tasks as spiritual beings is to build a progressively finer and more responsive instrument, a vehicle that can express our inner latent powers more fully. These powers may lie dormant for now, but we already possess them because we built them in past cycles of experience, and now our work is to awaken what already exists within. There are countless beings both below and above us in the scale of evolution. Some are invisible, such as elementals who exist in the air, the ether, electricity, and even fire. There is no empty or dead space anywhere in the universe. All forms of life are centers of consciousness, and each is slowly evolving upwards. As Mr. Crosby makes clear, we're not merely products of this earth. Our spiritual nature predates the earth. We have descended through the stairway of the seven worlds, carrying with us the fruits of past experiences, and we continue evolving onward stage by stage. Both Crosby and HPB emphasize that the true knowledge of correspondences can't be gained merely by studying diagrams or reading books. While those can be helpful, more is required to fully understand this knowledge. And as was said, it can't be imparted or given to us by anyone else. It has to be realized inwardly through direct perception and inner awakening. So true knowledge begins to emerge as we deepen our perception of universal law. And because we all come from one and the same source, practicing that means practicing compassionate altruism. Only when our minds and motives come into harmony with the one life do we start to perceive the intricate web of correspondences that link us to all other beings. And then we come to see that we are part of a vast living chain. And in that chain, no one is indispensable. Our development is not isolated from anyone else. It's collective. We rise or fall together. The study of correspondences and analogies, then, isn't just a mental exercise. It carries profound ethical implications. When we begin to understand that every thought, every action resonates across multiple planes, we realize that nothing we do is ever truly private or isolated. Just as ripples spread through water, our motives and inner states subtly affect the invisible atmosphere around us, and that influences others and shapes the larger field of consciousness that we all share. Mr. Judge emphasized that altruism is the first step in occultism because it aligns us with the universal law of harmony rather than with separative selfish currents that bind us to suffering. When we realize that each being is a center reflecting the whole, compassion arises naturally. If we see the same divine spark shining in all beings, how could we harm or exploit another? We begin to feel that what we do to others, we do to ourselves. At the same time, the practice of studying analogies and correspondences sharpens our ethical discernment. We can start to recognize the more subtle links between our inner state and outer circumstances. And those outer circumstances are those that we've attracted to ourselves through past actions. We begin to see how a cycle of irritation or selfish desire sends out waves that eventually return as karmic lessons. And that offers us the chance to learn and to refine ourselves. In this way, the law of correspondence becomes not only a key to cosmic mysteries, but it can also be a practical guide to daily life. It reminds us to purify our thoughts, to cultivate selflessness, and to act more consciously in cooperation with nature and in service of the greater whole. The law of correspondences, as was said, is considered a science, and one that may extend far beyond our current imagination. But even now we can begin to glimpse its implications, that all beings are forces, and all forces arise from beings. There exist subtle powers in nature that can be moved by thought alone. H.P. Blavatsky warned that knowledge of these higher powers, if pursued without altruism, would only lead to greater destruction. William Q. Judge echoes this, insisting that altruism is the first step in occultism. And Damodar Mavalankar has said that it is only when the lower self is fully attuned to the higher that the divine forces can act through it. Without ethical purification, these powers, even when latent, would be misused. HPB explains that analogy and correspondence is the primary method through which occult knowledge is conveyed. She calls analogy the guiding law of nature, the true Ariadne's thread that can lead us through the inexplicable paths of her domain. In other words, analogy and correspondence are indispensable for unraveling the mysteries of existence. And as was mentioned, she states that this law is the first key to the world problem and to the 7 keys of the universe. Because all the planes of nature are interdependent and mirror each other, we can read higher truths through their reflections in lower manifestations. This is the inductive, working from particulars to universals. And honing this ability to draw meaningful connections is a skill, and like any skill, it has to be practiced. And we can begin this practice by studying theosophy itself, especially the secret doctrine where analogies and correspondences are used throughout. But it doesn't need to just be when we read the secret doctrine. It can become an active daily discipline in the way we try to see patterns in nature or to link ideas and processes and trace spiritual laws through outer forms. Analogy is also the universal law of interpretation. It allows us to understand the unseen by studying the seen. In truth, we don't need to go far out of our way to begin using and practicing this principle. It's already woven into how we think. We only need to become more consciously aware of it. And as we are often reminded, pure intellectual study, no matter how devoted it is, will not yield true understanding unless it's matched by inner transformation. So we need to link our minds and motives and put them in harmony with nature and live in accordance with universal law, and then real inner perception can awaken. These ideas are not unique to theosophy. They are part of a universal tradition found throughout the world's wisdom teachings. Plato taught that the universe is a living being and that each soul is a microcosm of the whole. Pythagoras perceived the harmony of the spheres, the idea that celestial bodies move in mathematical harmony. Emerson wrote that every natural fact is a symbol of some spiritual fact. Jakob Burma spoke of the signature of all things, meaning that the outer form of anything in some ways reveals its inner spiritual reality, if we know how to make the analogy and corresponding connections. And in the Corpus Hermeticum, we find the famous Hermetic Axiom, that which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. Analogy and correspondence are central to all true esoteric traditions and are explicitly emphasized in theosophy. Just as the universe has stars, planets, and various planes of consciousness, so too does man possess inner principles like Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. Our physical body corresponds to the earth, our astral body to the astral light, and our higher mind to the cosmic or universal mind. The septenary constitution of man is an exact analogy to the septenary structure of a planet, a solar system, or even the entire universe. We also see this principle reflected in time and rhythm. Our waking state corresponds to life. Our sleep corresponds to death. As Shakespeare wrote, "What is death? To sleep, perchance to dream?" Sleep is a temporary withdrawal from the body. Death is a longer one. And just as we return from sleep to the same body, so too does the soul return, life after life, to new bodies. These comparisons, even though they're sometimes on the surface rather simple, they do reveal profound truths. And they point not only to structural similarities, but ultimately to universal cycles, the operation of karma, the law of rebirth. So much is really revealed through this process. Another common theosophical analogy is the seed in the tree. The seed contains the entire potential of the tree, though that potential remains hidden until conditions allow it to unfold. Similarly, the one self contains within it the full potential of spiritual realization, which gradually unfolds in us through many cycles of life and experiences as the right conditions are prepared. Even our breath reflects this greater law. The rhythm of inhalation, pause, and exhalation corresponds to cosmic processes: involution, assimilation, and evolution. This pattern is also represented in the sacred word Om, A-U-M, where each syllable relates to a phase in the cycle of manifestation. By focusing on our breath, we might gradually sense the inner echo of these cosmic processes within the domain of our physical bodies. So when we apply the law of analogy and correspondence in many contexts, we begin to see the connections and interrelations between all things. We cease to live as isolated fragments, and we become conscious of our connections to universal life. Poised as we are in the middle of a vast chain of beings, we come to realize that we are meant to be living bridges between above and below, between spirit and matter, between the unseen and the manifest. In the silence of the heart, there pulses the one life, and its rhythm echoes in our breath, in the tides of the ocean, and in the great dance of the stars. We're all here for a great purpose, and that's to serve the upward evolution of all beings and to become conscious co-workers with the divine. As Krishna declares in the Bhagavad Gita, having attained to me, they are no longer reborn. And Krishna, in this context, as in all contexts, is the one self of all. So having attained to the one self, there's no more need to be reborn. So through the law of correspondences, we can understand the truths behind what Krishna is saying. And we can hear HPB echoing the same truth in the Secret Doctrine, where she says, and this echoes, I think, something in one of the Vedas, the self is hidden in all beings and does not shine forth, but it is seen by subtle seers through sharp and subtle intellect. In studying these correspondences, we aren't just gathering abstract ideas, we're actually going through the process of refining the intellect and awakening deeper spiritual perception. So the law of correspondences trains the mind to think more clearly, and at the same time awakens intuition, and it's intuition that helps us make connections, perceive the living unity behind all appearances beyond forms. It stretches into the inner planes. And in this way, we can open up new vistas of understanding and experience and gradually unveil the self, the one self within, that radiant self, and realize our place in the great chain of being, that we're not like bystanders observing what's going on, but we're conscious participants. We're the, living bridges, co-creators, and servants of the greater whole. So that concludes the talk. I did maybe miss some of the diagrams. I think I missed this one. The sevenfold correspondences of the human principles and cosmic manifestation. But again, it echoes everything that's been said, that the sevenfold constitution can be related to very physical elements, to the human, to planets, to the universe. It's very universally applicable. And the more we study these kinds of things, the more we can make connections and reveal more of the hidden truths that theosophy starts us on the path of understanding. So I'll open it up for comments and questions.
Thank you, Kathy. So can we assume that the law of analogy and correspondence really helps us connect all the dots? It helps us see the entire picture. May not be a good word, but in totality, because most of us on a physical plane only perceive and understand what we see.
Yes, and instead of just seeing things as, isolated, strange phenomena, mm-hmm. we could make an effort to try to connect it to the expression of some higher or some analogous process or inner principle. And the more we do that, like I said, it becomes sort of like a habit of mind to reach for a higher idea or to make comparisons. And even if we're not correct, it's the practice in it of itself is beneficial, as it just begins to open our mind and make sense of patterns, look for patterns. The mind is always trying to look for patterns, but this is a way of sort of consciously giving that that process, move it on to the next stage of making it more of a conscious habit of mind. And as was mentioned, HPV says it's like an occult law, and it's the first key to the world problem. So we don't talk about it that much. We talk a lot about karma and reincarnation, but whenever those ideas are presented, connections are made. And so, yeah, the focus of this was to just bring out how important all those connections are, mm-hmm. and how helpful it is for us to use these processes consciously, I guess, to draw more meaning, draw more insight to everything that happens to us. Because it's said that nothing happens for no reason, in a sense that everything that comes to us is a result of our karma, but oftentimes it's really hard to make the connection why. And we may not need to know all the details why, but thinking along these lines just helps put everything into context, so that it makes more sense that mm-hmm. it is linked to something, mm-hmm. And trying to expand our minds to see those connections is what is going to help us unlock the inner senses and our inner powers that are latent. I thought it was interesting that it's, when I read that we've already evolved them. It's not like mm-hmm. there's something new. We've already used those powers. We just, they're latent in the form that we are at now, but they can be awakened and used again. have to be used in the right direction, though.
Yep. Morning, Lenny. You have any questions?
I hate to bring this up, but it made me think of the scandal that became viral this week of a man and a woman that went to a concert a few days ago, and that moment became viral because of because I obviously I don't condone what the controversies in that relationship, but at the same time I feel kind of pity because of the shame that those people are going through, because one of them lost a job. It's almost as if almost sounds as if their lives are ruined. Like no employer would give them employment after this worldwide no controversy. So it made me think of, wow, let's just say they're paying big time for whatever transgressions they were involved with. So a lot of times, as Kali was saying, some things don't make so much sense. Sometimes things happen out of the blue. Sometimes you can make more sense of it to some degree. But yeah, life is like that. This talk was very enlightening, and I really love I understand better the sevenfold nature of humankind. I really like the talk. Those would be my comments.
Yeah, I did hear about that scandal. It's super difficult for those individuals. Now I hope only they can know ultimately, maybe over the course of time, why it happened, why it played out the way it did, and what they'll learn from it. Maybe it'll start one of them on a different, better path, or face some honesty that they weren't acknowledging before. That sort of reminded me of the part in the talk where Plato talks about the sun is to sight what the good is to intellect. Like that was maybe their experience was maybe on one plane, but to draw a parallel to a higher plane, it's definitely a challenge. But how relationships between elements or beings can bond or be broken in all the ways that they can. I mean, it's only because maybe on a cosmical plane, planets crash into each other and like terrible things happen in the universe, that this was a reflection in some personal bodies of this type of thing happening. And it also reminds me of the talk we had recently of agents of karma, that we're all sort of agents of karma for others. You can't avoid it. You can't avoid not affecting others. So they're also, I guess, helping everyone to look at their own relationships with honesty, more honesty.
The Plato reference made me think of, in a way, of two parallels between two individuals very known for intellect, Albert Einstein and Oppenheimer. In the sense that both are extremely intelligent, but society remembers Albert Einstein more for relativism and theories, whereas Oppenheimer is more associated with the atomic weapon. So high intellect can go in different directions, as in that example. Where to some extent, some people could think that they were both just as intelligent as one another, But obviously, they went in very different directions.
Yeah, they did. They did. I mean, mine's thinking along the same lines, communicate on the, on the inner planes. So, but yeah, each person's motivation, their circumstances, all the pressures they were under. It's difficult, it's like you're saying, it's interesting to look at them, but we shouldn't judge too harshly because it's difficult to, with all that responsibility on their hands, what, we might have done and under all those pressures. Yeah, so taking something, an idea like that, as a mental practice of like trying to take it inductively or deductively and making whatever connections we can help us come to a better understanding. And ultimately, the adepts have refined this practice. And so all the connections are apparent to them on all levels. And it must be like so clear to them. Whereas to us, we're struggling just seeing parts because our vision isn't complete yet. Our understanding isn't complete yet. But we can work to stretch it, exercise it.
I have a second question, Kathy. So we know that science and religion have been on divergent paths and they still keep diverging. How can we use the law of analogy and correspondence to bring them both together as they should be?
Yeah, they seem separated, but honestly, as was said, this is a science. So when science becomes aware of the astral light and things like that, it will start to move more in the direction of what seems like religious in terms of spiritual, non-physical perceptions. And I think they're approaching that oftentimes with certain quantum principles, like the observer does affect the experiment, and how it seems like I guess they're not electrons, but they seem to know what the other's doing, even though they should be separated. So I think they're just starting to scratch the surface of that. So I think, science will continue to move in the direction of realizing more subtler principles and truths and be able to relate them to metaphysical ideas. And that may help bridge the gap between, I would say, metaphysics and science. Religion is always based on these facts. It's just not perfectly expressed. So as religion won't be able to necessarily deny the truths of science, they'll maybe go together more hand in hand. Do you have thoughts on that?
No, I'm just trying to, this is really, as Matt Lenny said, enlightening talk. I'm just trying to look at avenues through which science and religion, they probably have the bridges, but bridges are not yet visible because science is so highly objective. Maybe religion as practiced today is, more into rituals and blind faith. I'm trying to figure out how can we use this. This law really brings everything and really brings into a one, it points towards the oneness of all. Isn't it? The law of analogy correspondence. We need to figure out how we can kind of use that, even to a lay person, right? It's not easy going to go into, NIH and just start talking about the true meaning
Method.
of religion, how science is not that far apart from religion. And I'm just trying to think how we can use some of elements of this law to bridge a gap for the layperson, right? I think for someone who's exposed to theosophy, I think we can make those connections. But for someone outside this realm, how do we do that?
Yeah, they're more, probably to them, more discreet. We know that they're not truly separate, that they're fundamentally interconnected, and how, just figuring out how they are is an investigation of its own. But yeah, I think theosophy is a great bridge to both science and religion, to show that they're both truths, but how, that they're just expressed in a certain light. But if that could be adjusted, that things would fit together better. And obviously, the more we do that, the more connections we make, it just awakens the intuition, and our spiritual senses begin to unfold. And I think that's why HPV put some of these diagrams in the Secret Doctrine, is they're really helpful to, just to tie together the visual and the thought and the words of it, to put it into more of a more complete experience for us. So it's not just as one-sided as reading or just looking at it. We have like bringing more to the table to put together. Yeah, I guess we can end it there. If there's any final thoughts or comments, if not, we can take a break and come back for the study class on the Book of Confidences.
Thank you very much, Kathy.